how did you research out of hospital birth? Was there anything that you did to research it, or did you just kind of look for like midwives home birth? Because I know people say, do your research, or anybody that chooses it, they say that we did our research. So we knew what we were getting into and that kind of thing. But I don't think there's that much research as people think is out there. I don't think it's really out there. So I want to see, what did you guys do before having your home birth? So did you look into anything? Did you watch any videos? Or I know there's movies and books and there's a lot of influencers that are out there, but did you guys follow or look into any of that stuff?
Mothering.com, mothering magazines, and like every natural childbirth book you can think of, like Inmate Gadskin, and oh gosh, I don't even remember them all now. I had a stack like this big that I like threw away after Aquila died. It was like a big old stack of books, that I had read so many times. And I mean, like I was so involved with the mothering.com forums that I read in like the stillbirth forums and stuff, but they police posts about babies dying in home births that my only understanding of why a baby would die at a home birth is because something was wrong with them. Because that was the only narrative that was allowed to be there. So, I mean, the narrative didn't exist. And that was why it was so important to me to just make my story all over the place, was because I thought I was so involved that online, I should have seen something happen like what happened to me. And it was so quieted down that I didn't know that a healthy baby could just die in labor. It just never crossed my mind. Like, I just thought if a baby died, then something was wrong with the baby, like, or some huge gross malpractice, but that would never, like, I'm right by the hospital. My midwife knows what to do. Like, that just would never happen. Like, it did not cross my mind. Never saw it in front of my face. Like, so I wanted to make sure I was in front of people's faces. I thought, if somebody reads my story and still chooses a home birth, more power to them. But at least they've been warned, because I felt like I was unwarned, because all the stories that I read, it's like in all those books that you read, it's like when a baby dies, something's wrong with the baby. That's the way it's always presented. Like, it's never presented as the midwife made horrible mistakes and the baby who would have lived but died. Never. None of those stories. There's babies that die in all those books, the Inmate Gadskin books, or I can't remember all their names now, but all those books, there's babies that die, but it's always like some unavoidable, terrible thing that happened because something was very wrong with that baby.
Yeah, I agree with Liz. Like, you don't hear, so Noah was born and died in 2009, and March 29th, 2009, March, I think 24th, or 22nd, maybe. Anyway, this article came out about my midwife in the New York Magazine. And this article comes out, and my friend, who did not agree with my decision to home birth, sent it to me. And I read it that morning, and I thought, oh my gosh, like, what is Ricardo going to say when he reads this? And for a second, I'm like, oh, do I have to show it to him? And I did. I remember sending it to him. And he, he was a junior banker at the time, so he was working crazy hours. And I remember he said, we have to talk to her about this. And I said, okay, I will. I have an appointment tomorrow. Which that would have been like maybe Wednesday. I have an appointment tomorrow, and I'm going to go and talk to her about it. And I did. I went and I brought the article with me, and I said, I have to ask you, this is pretty scary. And she's like, oh, that mom and that dad and blah, 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 blah. Just like excuses. Oh, that mother was not doing this, and they weren't listening to me, and all this stuff. And, that goes to prove to you also, like, the idea that we are able to research something to an extent that then informs our decisions is true in many scenarios. I think birth, it's not. I think informed consent is something that we truly do not have to give. I don't know if it's pregnancy brain. I don't know if it's just the fact that when you have life growing inside of you, death is not even a part of that equation. And it's not, it's almost like you are immune to the realities of death. Like you're not. And so when you think about giving your consent, like in communities where death is part of birth and it's accepted, like the Amish, their death rate is really high, right? And communities where I'm from in Honduras, like, tribes that, do home births only, like death is part of birth. That it's part of their environment. It's part of their, their process. It's part of what, but for us, not so much. I think there is no way that you go into birth and are thinking about the possibility that this child will die, because the reality is that because of hospital intervention, that rate has dropped significantly. There's going to be generations of in your family that has not experienced birth loss. That's just the reality. Like if I can go back to my great grandmother, and my mother didn't lose children, my grandmother didn't lose children, and her mother did not lose children. And so all of that to say that informed consent is one of those things that to me, it means nothing. And so even, when you think about researching, you're really are burdening yourself with this idea that if you research enough, if you learn enough, you're going to come to the conclusion that is safest and best for you. I don't know that that's even possible. I think that the information, by the time that information comes into your hands, even in the form of a book, it has been filtered, doctored, manipulated. It's not the raw information. This is not a scientific study. This is not like, at the time of Noah's birth, there was absolutely nothing out there. Like there were only good stories. The Today Show had talked about how great it was what my midwife was doing at the time. Like how amazing, look at this. And this is an alternative, the Today Show, right? As mainstream as it comes. So naturally, when I lost Noah, that article had come out immediately. I reached out to the author, and Andrew Goldman, I'll never forget. I called him. I left a message with the editor for the New York Magazine, and that that Saturday night at midnight, he called me, and he said, "Can I come over tomorrow? Can I come over tomorrow?" And I said, "Yeah." And he sat with us, and then he started telling me, this is a journalist, and he said, the reason I knew about you, this midwife, was because we were thinking about it for my wife. And this article started off as a great piece about this wonderful midwife. Look at what she's doing. Look how amazing, blah, 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 blah. And he said, and once I started digging, and he looked at me, he said, I had to dig. And the only reason I found some pieces that formed this article was because he was in a forum when she was presenting her book, and two people stood up and started protesting and saying, well, you did this. And so he went and reached out to those people to get the other side of the story that he was trying to cover. He's like, like a good journalist, he was like, okay, can't find anything negative except at this forum. And that's what got him digging into it. And that's why this article, I think it was, Too Extreme for Home Birth? I think it was called. Is Kara too extreme from home birth? I think something like that. Anyway, moving on. I did too. I read all the books. I went to all the forums. I did all that. But at the time, there was absolutely nothing telling the other side. after, whenever all had gone, wrong, in order to get an attorney to actually look at our case and consider it, he, with this journalist, asked us if we could give an interview to the Today Show to show the other side. And I remember we said, no, we're not public people. Like, I have a company, you guys, and I'm not even public with my company. Like, I do not, you can't, I'm just not. And I said, no, there's no way. My husband, even less, like, no, there's no way. And then about a month after, I had been actively looking for information on my midwife that I had missed. I must have missed it. I missed it. In all my research, I just wasn't looking for the right thing. I missed it. And nothing. There was nothing out there. And I was paying at a pharmacy for something. For 4 months, I did not leave my apartment, but for the little things that I went to do, and there was a baby, this woman that had this baby strapped to her. And I was like, oh my gosh, this baby looks about the age that Noah would be. And because I'm a masochist, I went to the woman. I'm like, oh, your baby's so cute. When was he? When was he or she born? And she said, oh, April 3rd. Don't ask me why. I said, oh, where did you give birth? By the way, April 3rd is the day that we buried Noah. Where did you give birth? And she said, oh, you might not know. It was a home birth. And I said, who was your midwife? I mean, the intensity of that moment. And she said, my midwife was her midwife. And I looked at her and said, on April 3rd? She said, yeah. And I said, yeah, your midwife was my midwife. And my baby died. And that woman's eyes were just like, oh my God, can you take my number? Can I call you? Can we talk? And I did. I don't even remember I don't remember what happened, honestly. But I remember thinking, okay, this woman did not know about me when she went into labor with my midwife. And I came home that day and I told my husband, we're talking to the Today Show. We're doing it because of this. And we did. But at the time, there was nothing. There was no bad stories, like none. They were buried, completely buried. And talk about the betrayal, right? Talk about, like, what was that? Do you guys remember, Liz, you might remember because it was around the same time, that organization that was getting the numbers on births at home, and it was this organization that's putting together some statistics on home births and babies that had died during home birth. Was
it NARM? Did NARM do it?
I think NARM did it.
I remember a big study was done in Oregon and a few other states, and I thought it was NARM that collected their own data, and their own data was horrible. Yeah.
And they buried it for a long time.
8 out of 100 babies died.
It was horrible. Yes.
Their own
but they
stats,
buried it. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Because I was called. Yeah. I was called to give information for this study that they were doing, and for years afterwards, that information was not made public. I think the only reason that they made it public is because somebody sued them for the information, and so it was, yeah.
I actually know why that got made public. Actually, some of the states got involved legally and wanted the public information, and doctors who had been trying to get the data and statistics forced them to, and then said, by the way, your data is crap, because they didn't have all the information about the types of births. They didn't have like overdue. They wanted like the actual data, the actual reports of everything. And yes, they did. This is actually, I just talked about this literally last month. Another lady that doesn't even live in America, she knew about this because in Oregon, how they shoved it for so long. And then now all the numbers came out because the studies just came out. And like, I think it started coming out in November of last year. Literally all these things are starting to come out now. And all this time we thought, years ago, after Gavin's, has been, maybe about 6 years or something, they assumed it was like, we're losing babies out of hospital 3 times more than we are in hospital. This is what they've been assuming with the data that came from this. Actually, it came from them, which they tried to bury, but they couldn't bury it because you can't. You cannot bury this information. It's going to come out. So because of that, doctors got involved. Let's see, like, I think more government officials got involved, senators, other people got involved, lawyers, things like that. They got involved, took it over. We're fighting for the information. They've been fighting for all this data. Well, they started digging into coroner's reports, hospital reports, all this other data. So they couldn't cover that up anymore. And as it turned out, came out last year, oh, we thought it was 3 times. It's actually 8 times as much minimum from Oregon and Washington and all that, because that's where they took the most data. But yes, the head midwives up there and then whatever, and NARM all try to keep it down, keep it whatever. Even our big, what is
when
it,
they
Nana
first
or
came
whatever.
out with that, what they let go of that information at first was, look at how good the stats are. We have such low episiotomy, low for interventions, low C-sections, but they're like, shh about the deaths. Yes, you have a low C-section rate because you let babies die instead of getting them C-sections.
Yep. That's exact. And that's what happened. The doctors had to fight for the information to actually say, because they were like, okay, but the low C-section and induction and episiotomy and all means nothing when we're looking at injuries. The injuries happening are ridiculous. And then let's talk about just the losses. And on top of that, the other big one that's starting to pop up now is not just babies, but now we have mothers are actually dying at home too, and at huge, huge numbers and big increases all across the US. It's been happening. So in the process of, just like you guys are saying stuff, it's been 8 years and I watched them try to cover. More people have been getting involved, and you can't cover this up forever.
Well, it was easy to cover up when it was like a fringe amount of people doing it, but then they wanted to push it mainstream, make the money, make it mainstream. And so as it gets pushed mainstream, more and more women use it. And you know what? Mainstream women expect, mainstream care. We expect living babies. We expect the things that, as living in a not third world country, we expect that, if our baby's healthy and we're healthy, that we're all going to come out alive. And that expectation isn't necessarily in fringe groups, you know what I mean? Like, as much so. But when it becomes mainstream, your mainstream mama coming along is not expecting her baby to die. And when it does, it's harder to keep her suppressed with the woo when she's like, oh, look, there's a whole bunch of us and I was expecting this mainstream care and I got, total crap. I would have had better care if I was in a hut in Kenya. It's like, what is going on?
It was going to be like twice the amount of money that my hospital birth was going to cost me. That's how much my home birth was going to cost. At the time, I'll tell you how much. At the time, I think it was $13,500 just for the midwife. The doula was like $2,500. The acupuncturist was like $1,500. Like the people in New York City, at least, that were choosing home birth was not to avoid cost at hospitals. It was, it actually was more expensive to have her at home. But you're right, Liz. Like mainstream. Like, this wasn't a natural choice for me. Like, it wasn't. It was actually a choice outside of like what I felt was a necessity, but also, the way that it was painted, the way that it was portrayed, the way that we see it, how it was infiltrating mainstream people with just the best stories, right? And now that I know more, when you talk about trust and betrayal, the other day I was telling my husband that I wanted a TV. This goes to tell you. And he said, oh, what TV? And I was telling him, but I want to hear now here. And I realized I'm going to call two of my friends that are experts at this and this to tell me what and where. And my husband said, Catherine, you know, like where you want it. And I realized, oh, but I'm sorry, I don't trust myself to even make that decision. Like I don't trust myself to even choose a TV and where to put it. So, you know, this decision was my first decision that I went against the current with. And that goes to tell you also, for someone that's educated, and I, you know, and I'm a big reader, and I've just, you know, I remember thinking there isn't information out there that I have not read. I like literally have poured myself into this. And what I realized is that there wasn't any information. And so now I don't know, like, you know, for the moms that have lost recently, you know, I actually don't know how the climate has changed in that sense. I do know that whenever I gave that interview to the Today Show, which by the way, I've never watched it, but I remember, you know, I remember giving this interview about maybe 6 weeks after I had lost Noah. And one of the things that I wanted to drive home was like, you know, C-section isn't the worst thing that can happen to you. Because at the time, that was the worst thing that could have happened to me. That's what I believed. And so I wanted everyone to know, listen, when you think about the worst thing, death is the worst thing. And when you fully absorb the fact that your baby can die, then your decision might be different. Hey, if it's not, if your decision, your choice is not different, I'm not going to judge you, but I'm glad that at least you have the information and you're not under some, you know, you're not in la la land thinking that that's not even a possibility ever. So, you know, anyway, and I wanted to have more children too, by the way. And you know, and my births have been quite traumatic, all three of them. And I decided, you know, mainly Noah's birth and how it all happened, you know, really did limit me. I'm like, you know, I don't know that I can gamble like that.